Hello and welcome to Streamers and Punches, the podcast from SoundNotionTV that looks at current events and new releases in the world of film music. My name is Bill Witham.
And I'm Kevin Wilt.
And on today's show, we want to look at a couple events that just recently happened, including the Golden Globe Awards, talk about a couple things we've been listening to lately, and look at what else is going on. First off, congratulations are in order to Ludovic Bors for winning Best Score for the artist. And now, we did talk last week about how they used some of the music from Psycho some of the Vertigo music by Bernard Herrmann in the climax to the film, and they raised all sorts of stink about that, especially amongst composers and amongst other people in the film industry. And the director did come out with a rebuttal to that and say why he basically felt that he had creative license to use that music and that they did get permission from Bernard Herrmann's family and estate. So all the rights were secure, but it still rubbed a lot of artists and musicians and especially composers the wrong way. And then, of course, as if he's now validated, that score won for the Golden Globes as Best Motion Picture Score. So there you have it. Any thoughts on that, Kevin?
No, yes, there's this controversy involving the Bernard Herrmann music, but my understanding of the situation is that that was not a decision by the composer, that was a decision by the director. So I don't know how much that should really affect the perception of the score, because I guess it's really a separate decision from the musical composition. But I have not had a chance to see this film yet. Bill, I don't think you've seen it either, have you?
No, not yet.
I know and this is something we were kind of talking about before the show. It's and I was chatting online with Daniel Schweiger this morning, who we interviewed a couple of weeks ago, asking him what he thought about this score winning, and he said, well, basically it's a good score, but that there were probably better ones out there, and so I wondered, how much the accolades for this score come from the fact that it's for what is essentially a silent film. It's, perhaps, it certainly can be argued that maybe music plays a more important role, or at least a more exposed role in a silent film than it does in a film with dialogue. But you wonder if that kind of increased exposure of the music, that's not the same thing as the music being better. So you wonder if the fact that because this was a silent film, that it maybe brings a little more attention to the music, that people therefore, I kind of thought, I guess for what I'm trying to say is maybe people thought the music was better because it has a more important role being more exposed than it would if this were the same score written for a regular film,
Yeah, it got more notoriety perhaps by virtue of it being a silent film, and that all you could hear while watching the film would be the music, and that you almost certainly would have to agree that it was that it played an integral part rather in the film itself. So,
right.
Okay, well, we should mention, so not only did Ludovic Bors win for the artist, but also the best song was Masterpiece, which was by Madonna, Julie Frost, and Jimmy Harry for the film W.E., and that won for best song. So that takes care of the Golden Globes. Next thing, we're always talking about CD releases when new stuff comes out. Not too much now since the holidays are over, but Intrada did come out with a double dose of Michael Kamen. If there are any Michael Kamen fans out there, of course, he's most famous for Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and the Lethal Weapon series, and Mr. Holland's Opus. These are definitely two of his lesser-known scores, but they're definitely well-known 80s movies. One would be Renegades, that had Kiefer Sutherland and Lou Diamond Phillips in it, and the other would be Roadhouse, or maybe I should say the infamous Roadhouse, or just however you think of Roadhouse, the famous one with Patrick Swayze. Yeah. So both scores by Michael Kamen are now released, and they can be picked up at Intrada from their website, intrada.com, or Screen Archives. Links to both will be on our website, SoundNotion.tv/SAP. And one more thing I wanted to mention, at the Film Score Monthly website, Scott Bettencourt has like a weekly article that he writes, like a kind of like a Friday roundup. And one of the components of that was a look at 10 composers on the rise for the coming year. And I just wanted to kind of draw your attention to it, draw our listeners' attention to it. Go check out the link. Again, this will be the 10 composers on the rise link on our website. Go read it. I'm not going to list all 10 composers, but he did mention not only Lorne Balfe, who I'm going to talk about in just a little bit because of his involvement with the Sherlock Holmes sequel, but also Chris Bacon, who I mentioned in a previous podcast. So I just want to say, hey, that's cool that someone else heard him and thought this guy was worth noting. Because apparently, up to this point, Chris Bacon's been doing mostly animation and children's movies. And then Source Code, which is the movie that I heard and thought, this is very cool, and I really look forward to seeing what Chris Bacon does next, was what was definitely pointed out by Scott Bettencourt in the article. So anyway, 10 composers on the rise. Pretty cool article. You might see some familiar names. You might see some names that are not familiar, and that's the point of an article like that. So check that out. And the link will be on our website. Next up, we want to look at a couple things that we've been listening to this week. Kevin, do you want to tell me anything you've been listening to?
Sure. Although it's certainly not a new score, a score that I kind of grew up with a little bit, and it just recently started listening to again on the CD, and that is James Horner's score to The Rocketeer from, I think, 1991 and 1992. It has just come out on, well, the film has just been released on a 20th anniversary Blu-ray disc, and it's kind of funny that I've seen the movie in stores, and it's on the front of the package. It's labeled as by the same director as Captain America. So even Joe Johnston's other films are kind of benefiting from the success with Captain America. And actually, for all the praise we've talked about over these past few months about Alan Silvestri's score to Captain America, The Rocketeer has a lot of those same things. It's kind of the same, a very similar kind of thing. It's basically a comic book story. It's largely set in that same time period as Captain America. The Rocketeer score, it definitely has some of the musical idioms that you hear in a lot of James Horner's scores. I mean, there are moments of it when you hear, a lot of Star Trek II, or a lot of even scores that came after. So like his score to Troy, there are a lot of things in there that you hear in The Rocketeer. Something that I did notice, which I find interesting, it's very much a time period sort of thing. You hear it a lot. You hear it a lot in movies from really the early to mid '90s, which is this very, very kind of bright, optimistic, Lydian or raised scale kind of tone, and it's something that James, you think like Dennis the Menace or all sorts of different family movies or kid movies or whatever from the 1990s. Mm-hmm. Have that same kind of tone in their score, with usually a lot of glockenspiel and a lot of wind chimes and other very bright metallic kinds of things. And there's a lot of that in The Rocketeer. But it's got some really nice stuff in it. I mean, part of the movie is about some of the characters in the movie are movie stars. So there is a sense of this also golden age Hollywood 1940s kind of grandiose movie score element about it too, which he uses well to illustrate some of those characters. If it's a score you haven't heard, it's definitely worth checking out. I'm not the biggest James Horner fan in the world, but I really like this score. I think it's definitely worth checking out. It's certainly not new to a lot of people. It is a 20-year-old score, but I like it, and that's what I've been listening to lately. What about you, Bill?
Okay. Last week I mentioned that I wanted to do a little more digging on the Sherlock Holmes and see how the Romani influence is used on it and everything else. And I picked it up. I listened to it. I like it. It does sort of carry over some of the themes. Well, it would have to. So it does carry over the themes of Sherlock Holmes from the first movie into the second one. And the Romani element is it's very present on the CD, so I think it's represented pretty well. There's a few tracks that's almost entirely them, and then some are sort of weaved in and out with Hans Zimmer's, I want to say his instrumentalists. But what I actually thought was maybe as equally cool or maybe a little more interesting was the section of the film. And if anyone's seen this, you know the section that deals with opera. If you haven't seen it, it's not necessarily a spoiler. It happens about halfway through the film. But there's an amazing sort of montage or just action sequence that involves a performance of Mozart's Don Giovanni. And if you know how the scene plays out in the film, it is incorporating, it's cutting between the opera which is taking place and then the characters which are trying to sort of sneak in underneath the stage and find, it's essentially they're finding sort of the next step on their way to hopefully solving the mystery of the movie. And while that's all happening, we get snippets of the Mozart opera mixed with the score, but actually upon closer listen, it's just a combination of that. So all of a sudden you get the Mozart, which even though it's an opera, it's a little more, I would say, heavily orchestrated than maybe a Mozart symphony.
Yeah.
It's never been.
It's Mozart, but with Hans Zimmer's orchestra, basically.
Yeah, there's Mozart now with a low end to it. Like you get low brass, a lot of bass drum, a lot of timpani, a lot of just it's
27
insane.
double basses, you know.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy and it's almost humorous sounding. I mean, hell, I think it is actually pretty funny, but it's also pretty cool and pretty just it's pretty raw. So
Yeah.
If our listeners will indulge me for a moment, I created a tiny like 1 minute excerpt to play because I just think it's so cool. So anyway, so check this out. This is a 1 minute excerpt of To the Opera from Sherlock Holmes, A Game of Shadows. Okay, I love the low end on that.
Yeah, it's, you know, although I've seen Mozart operas, I would probably think about attending them a little bit more frequently if he had a big monster orchestra like that instead of a typical 18th century orchestra. I need like a couple contrabassoons, you know, like 3 or 4 bass trombones would be nice, 8 tubas. 16 French horns. I'd probably go to the opera more often if that were the case. Although you missed what was my favorite part of that whole scene, Bill, which we talked about this a little bit last week. There are moments when it's Mozart plus a little bit of Hans Zimmer, and then there are moments when it's Hans Zimmer with a little bit of Mozart, which is how the scene starts. It's when the characters figure out that, oh, we have to go to the opera because that's where the bad guy is. It's Hans Zimmer bringing the Don Giovanni tune into the underscore, as opposed to Hans Zimmer using the Hans Zimmer orchestra sound underneath the opera itself. It's both of them are kind of neat things, but I think I like the introduction of that a little more, and that was the part you left out. But I'll forgive you for that. It's still pretty cool.
Well, you can do your next mix of it, and
yeah.
We'll look at it in the next episode.
I'll do it right next time.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of, in a funny way, I almost would agree that if some opera sounded more like this, I think more people would go see opera.
Yeah.
Because this whole scene kind of acts as an advertisement. The only problem is it's false advertising because there's just no way you'll get that same effect. I didn't play the whole excerpt. The whole track is about 4 minutes long, and when it hits these huge diminished chords, which are from the original Mozart, the it's insane. I mean, it just sounds like diminished chords on crack. They're so loud and they're so heavy, and the horns are playing like there's just no way they could have played in Mozart's time like that. And so it's
We
just
just want Stravinsky to have rewritten Mozart's operas. That's all we're asking.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So
I don't think that's too much,
that's
even though he's dead.
so Sherlock Holmes: The Game of Shadows is what I've been listening to lately. Yeah.
Cool.
Now, we didn't really have a chance to do sort of a full year in review or anything like that, and everyone else and their brother is doing that in every single category, and really they're all done with it at this point.
Yeah.
But rather than do that, I thought it'd be nice to at least just look back on the last year and just kind of pick a couple choices of things that we liked, things that maybe we spoke about on our show, maybe we played some excerpts and earlier examples, but just kind of briefly touch upon what stood out to us.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Kevin, what did you hear over the last year that you thought, yeah, this is pretty cool. This is at least worth bringing up again.
Yeah. One score that I brought up a bunch of times in several different episodes was Alan Silvestri's score to Captain America, which I brought up like 5 minutes ago. I mean, the film itself, I probably didn't have huge expectations on, and so the film was better than I thought it was going to be. But I just thought the score was written in such a way, just did a lot of things that I think you don't hear a lot of scores rising to that level in terms of it's. I guess that film was scored in a more operatic way where you have characters that you're invested in and they have thematic ideas that are attached to them, and it scores nowadays, most scores nowadays tend to be more about mood and atmosphere and less about being associated with characters in that sort of Wagnerian sense. So that was definitely a score that stood out to me. The other score that stood out to me, less because of how good it was and more because of what it was trying to do and whether or not it was successful at it, was Michael Giacchino's score to Super 8. I think just the whole idea of that film of kind of, a 21st century take on the 1980s Amblin film, and it's basically the same, modus operandi that Michael Giacchino had in writing the score, I think is an interesting concept. I feel like it maybe didn't live up to the concept quite so much. I didn't think the film was very good. I didn't think the score was super great, but it just kind of that idea behind it, I thought was interesting. And part of the reason I want to mention both of these scores is in large part I don't think either of these scores are really seen as big contenders as far as the award season goes. As we get closer to the Academy Awards, I'm sure we'll be talking more about the scores that are nominated and things like that. I don't think these two scores are in that category. So I figured, because they kind of stuck out for me, we could talk about them now as opposed to in a couple of weeks when we talk about the more award-worthy scores, if you will. But that's kind of what stuck out for me.
Okay. I mentioned in a few past episodes Rango by Hans Zimmer. In some ways, it's kind of Hans Zimmer in cartoon mode, which we've heard before with Kung Fu Panda and other films of that like. But I really enjoyed it. I don't know why. Maybe it was a combination of guitars and the sort of mariachi band, the sound that he had. There's a really great trumpet playing by Arturo Sandoval over the end credits. That's just awesome. And it just really had a lot of personality to it. The movie was very weird, but in a charming and kind of cute way. And that just, it all kind of came together. And I just thought it was a really charming score. It wasn't anything momentous. It wasn't, it wasn't a crutch for the film to lean on, like, say, The Artist, maybe. I don't know. But it was just, it was charming. And it had personality, and it was colorful, and I enjoyed it. The other one was kind of, it's kind of a tough decision. I enjoyed Tintin, and I mentioned before Hannah, and I thought that was really cool and electronic and memorable. But I kind of let Hugo edged them out for the one that I thought had some of the same colors, like accordions and some of the sort of French, sort of the style instrumentation that are in Tintin. But I like the theme, I like the use, I like the orchestration, I like the general tone of the score, and having seen both films, well, I know which film I enjoyed more. That would be Hugo. But I just kind of felt that the score was a little more potent and had a little more of an impact than the others that I mentioned. So the ones that I kind of thought stood out and were good scores, Rango and Hugo, and I did not intend for them to both end with a G-O and to be two syllables. So, so there's that. Any honorable mentions, Kevin?
Not that I can really think of. I think any other scores that come to mind are scores that we'll probably be talking about around Academy Award time anyway. I guess Warhorse is probably the first thing that comes to mind. But yeah, so no honorable mentions for me. Not that I can think of off the top of my head anyway.
Okay. And I mentioned a couple others that I kind of liked but didn't put them down, so you know what I was thinking. But anyway, Kevin, anything else you wanted to mention?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay. All right. Well, that will do it for our extra lean, no-fat episode tonight, in honor of the recent Golden Globe Awards with Ludovic Bourse and his award for Best Score for the artist. I wanted to leave you with the overture to the artist as we exit the program. So that will do it for this episode of Streamers and Punches. You can listen to us on SoundNotion.tv/SAP, where you can subscribe to our show, leave comments, and find links to the music we spoke about. You can also subscribe to the show through iTunes. My name is Bill Witham.
And I'm Kevin Wilt.
Thanks for listening.